This country should not exist. Gold statues that used to rotate to follow the sun. Black cars banned because the president prefers white. An entire capital city built out of marble and left almost completely empty. It sounds fake, like something out of a dystopian novel that nobody would believe, but it's real. And it's run by one of the most bizarre and tightly controlled regimes on Earth. This is the story of the world's most insane dictatorship and what's really hiding underneath the marble. Because here's the thing. When a system puts this much effort into how it looks, the statues, spotless boulevards, gleaming facades, it usually means it has a lot to hide. And Turkmenistan has been hiding something for decades. Ashgabat, the capital, holds a Guinness World Record, but not for anything you'd expect. Not for its technology or its skyline or the size of its economy. It holds the record for the highest density of white marble-clad buildings on Earth. Hundreds of structures, identical in their pale perfection, stretching across the edge of one of the most punishing deserts in all of Central Asia. From satellite imagery, it looked like a city designed by someone who had never actually visited one. The streets are immaculate. The architecture is enormous. The parks are manicured. And the fountains, hundreds of them, pulse with water in a country that spent decades battling severe water scarcity. That last detail is worth sitting with. Fountains in a desert nation, built not because the people need them, but because they look impressive on state television. Ashgabat also holds the Guinness record for the largest indoor Ferris wheel, for the most fountain pools in a public space, and the city's main avenue is lined with 22 five-star hotels, in a country that allows fewer than 10,000 foreign visitors per year. There's a $2.3 billion airport here, shaped like a falcon in flight, designed to handle 14 million passengers annually. On most days, it's nearly empty. But the visual spectacle is just the surface. And the longer that you look at Turkmenistan, the more the surface begins to crack. Because behind the marble and the monuments, there's a system so deeply strange and so deliberately constructed that most people don't fully understand how it works or why it survived as long as it has. And once you do understand it, the gold statues, they stop looking funny, and they start looking like something else entirely. Turkmenistan sits in the heart of Central Asia, landlocked and largely forgotten by the international community. It's roughly the size of Spain, but with a population of fewer than 8 million people. Most of them are concentrated around oases at the edge of the Karakum Desert, one of the largest sand deserts in all of the world. The country holds some of the largest natural gas reserves on the planet. It should, by any reasonable analysis, be wealthy. Now that it isn't, at least not for its people, is one of the most important parts of this story. Turkmenistan gained independence from the Soviet Union in 1991, and within months, the country had already begun its transformation into something the modern world had rarely seen. The man who built that transformation was Saparmurat Niyazov. And if you've never heard of him, that's largely by design, because what he created was a regime so sealed off from the outside world that almost nothing gets in, and almost nothing gets out. Niyazov took the title Turkmenbashi, or the leader of the Turkmen. And then he started remaking the country in his own image, literally. He renamed months of the year after himself and his mother. He renamed bread after her too, because apparently that was something a head of state could just simply decide. He banned dogs from the capital for their unappealing odor. He banned opera, ballet, and cinema for being foreign to Turkmen culture. He required all state employees to prove their racial purity back 3 generations, a demand that triggered a mass exodus of Russian professionals and effectively stripped the country of much of its skilled workforce overnight. He mandated that government officials climb a 37-kilometer staircase he had carved into a mountain, while he watched above in a helicopter and reportedly criticized them at the finish line for being too slow. He advised citizens to chew on bones to improve dental health, citing the fact that dogs don't visit dental offices as his reasoning. He commissioned a 250-foot rotating golden statue of himself, designed to follow the sun across the sky, so no matter what time of day it was, the Turkmenbashi was always facing the light. The rotation of the statue was stopped in 2010 and moved from its giant plinth. He also wrote a 400-page book, the Runama, which he declared a sacred national text. It was placed alongside the Quran in every mosque in the country. It became the central pillar in the national school curriculum. Prisoners were required to swear oaths on it for early release. Drivers had to pass examinations on its contents to get a license. And Niyazov declared that reading it 3 times would guarantee entry into heaven. A copy was launched into space, intended to, quote, conquer the cosmos. Now, you might be tempted to write all of this off as just eccentricity, the vanity of an isolated man with way too much power and too little opposition. But that's exactly what the system wants you to think, because none of this was random. The rename months weren't a quirk. The golden statue wasn't ego run amok. The banned cinema and the sacred guidebook and the mandatory mountain hike, all of it served a single purpose: total control over reality. When the state can rename time itself, it sends a message. When the state can rewrite the calendar, require that its sacred text be placed alongside religious scripture, dictate the color of every car on the road, and ban entire forms of human expression for not being sufficiently loyal, well, what it's really saying is this: nothing is outside of our authority. Not your spiritual life, not your working hours, not the name of the bread you eat or the car you drive. And anyone who forgot that message was reminded, and fast. Because beneath the marble, Turkmenistan runs on fear. The secret police, trained in the Soviet Union, would use psychotropic drugs on political detainees. Those labeled enemies of the state were paraded on live national television, forced to deliver confessions, made to beg for mercy for their families. And after the cameras stopped rolling, they'd vanish. No trial records, no death certificate, no information of any kind. Just silence. In November of 2002, Niyazov's motorcade was ambushed in a failed assassination attempt. What followed was a purge so sweeping it consumed hundreds of people: officials, citizens, family members who were arrested, given show trials, and then subsequently disappeared. In an atmosphere of heightened paranoia, informers were recruited to monitor private conversations. Car radios were banned to reduce background noise during surveillance operations. Roadblocks were erected every few miles as permanent checkpoints. All public gatherings, including weddings and funerals, required government approval. This is not ancient history. In 2024, Human Rights Watch documented approximately 96 ongoing cases of enforced disappearance. Individuals who were imprisoned years ago, whose sentences have since expired, and who have never reappeared. Families receive no information. No one knows where they are. And the repression has not softened. If anything, it has evolved. In 2025, Turkmenistan received a Freedom House score of 1 out of 100 for political and civil liberties, including a score of 0 for political rights. The 2025 World Press Freedom Index ranked it 174th out of 180 nations, and rated it the single worst country on earth for political context, meaning the relationship between the government and its media is, by global standards, as broken as it gets. Journalists who cooperate with foreign outlets are arrested. In 2024, a reporter served 4 years in prison after authorities discovered that he had shared a single photograph with an exile-based news outlet. Citizens who post on social media asking for help, covering the cost of food or medicine, are visited by police and ordered to take their videos down. In July of 2024, security services in one region detained and interrogated dozens of residents simply for engaging with foreign news content online. Phones were confiscated and warnings were issued. If you're finding this breakdown useful, be sure to subscribe to Fall of Nations, because what looks bizarre on the surface often hides the most revealing systems underneath. The regime doesn't just control what happens inside Turkmenistan. It reaches beyond the border. Since 2023, multiple activists based in Turkey have been forcibly deported back to Turkmenistan and subsequently disappeared into their prison system. In late May of 2025, 3 activists were simultaneously held in Turkish deportation centers facing return, facing what human rights organizations have described as a serious risk of torture and politically motivated imprisonment. The government refuses to renew Turkmen passports through consular services abroad, trapping citizens in legal limbo or forcing them to return home, where they face unknown consequences. In August of 2024, administrations at 2 universities require newly enrolled students to surrender their passports entirely to prevent any possibility of unauthorized foreign travel. Students were made to sign statements agreeing not to leave Turkmenistan until graduation, or you would face expulsion. The state controls not just what you can say, it controls whether you can leave. This is what the marble is protecting. Not prosperity, not stability, not some functioning social contract. What the marble is protecting is the machinery underneath. Now, the obvious question is this: how does any of this actually function? How does a regime that operates this visibly, this aggressively, keep millions of people compliant? Part of the answer is economic, and it's more fragile than it looks. Turkmenistan sits on top of some of the largest natural gas reserves in the world, estimated at roughly 24.3 trillion cubic meters. placing it among the top 5 nations on the planet. That gas has been the regime's survival mechanism since independence. It buys loyalty through subsidized food, free utilities, and state employment. Or at least it did, until the cracks began to show. But before we get into that, here's a detail about how Turkmen gas becomes a trap that almost nobody talks about. When the Soviet Union collapsed, Turkmenistan inherited enormous energy reserves, but almost none of the infrastructure needed to monetize them independently. Every pipeline ran through Russia. Every refinery was elsewhere. So when Turkmenistan needed cash, it had to go through Moscow, which bought the gas at a fraction of the market value and paid just basically what it wanted when it wanted. In the 1990s, gas exports collapsed entirely for a period. Cotton production, the other pillar of the economy, fell by half. Living standards deteriorated so sharply that the regime scrambled to find a lifeline. And that lifeline turned out to be China. Beginning in 2009, Turkmenistan built a pipeline running through Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan to the Chinese border. By 2015, 3 pipeline lines were operational, with a combined capacity approaching 55 billion cubic meters per year. China became the dominant buyer, eventually purchasing over 90% of Turkmenistan's gas exports. Soviet dependency on Moscow had simply been replaced by a new dependency on Beijing. And then in 2014, the global commodity crash hit. Gas prices collapsed. Turkmenistan's export revenues were slashed almost in half. A government budget that had been running a surplus of 10% of GDP swung sharply into deficit. The system that bought compliance through subsidized food and free utilities began to buckle visibly. Sugar disappeared from store shelves, then cooking oil, then flour. Rationing appeared in a country whose state media had been broadcasting images of gleaming supermarkets and overflowing harvests. But unemployment, always understated by official figures, were estimated by outside observers at around 70%. In 2017, the government deducted 15 to 20% of monthly salaries from oil and gas workers for 6 straight months to help finance the hosting of a regional sporting event. In 2021, school administrations redirected funds that were designated for orphans to pay for building renovations instead. As recently as 2024, independent reporting documented food price spikes and sporadic bread shortages in state stores, with authorities responding to public complaints not with solutions, but rather with fines and interrogations. In February of 2024, when residents in one region tried to meet with local officials to complain about rising prices for flour and bread, security services interrogated them instead. And yet, through all of it, the cotton fields kept running. Every year, tens of thousands of workers are mobilized into the harvest. Not farmers, but doctors, lawyers, teachers, flight attendants, state employees compelled by decree to meet daily cotton quotas in temperatures that regularly exceed 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Workers who fail to meet their quota risk public humiliation and job loss. In a country with virtually no private sector, that threat is existential. A May 2025 report from the Cotton Campaign, based on independent monitoring, confirmed that this practice continued through the entire 2024 harvest season. Unchanged, systematic, hidden behind the marble. This is how the illusion is maintained. Not through genuine prosperity, through a combination of fear and just enough subsistence to prevent open revolt. And through a propaganda apparatus so total that, for many citizens, the version of reality on state television is the only version they've ever had access to. But here's what makes Turkmenistan truly dangerous, and why its future is far less stable than it looks on paper. The system has no feedback mechanism. In any functioning state, even a deeply flawed one, there are pressure valves, courts that occasionally push back, media that occasionally embarrasses officials, local processes that surface problems before they become catastrophic. These mechanisms are imperfect everywhere, but they do exist. They allow a system to self-correct. Turkmenistan has none of them, deliberately. Every institution that may generate feedback has been eliminated, co-opted, or silenced. The judiciary exists to confirm state decisions. The media exists to amplify state narratives. The population has been conditioned over decades to understand that expressing dissatisfaction is treasonous. In a system like that, the only information the leadership receives is the information that it wants to hear. Officials report what they need to report to keep their positions. Numbers are adjusted. Harvests are declared successful. Shortages are described as temporary. Small problems don't get fixed. They get reported as non-existent until they aren't. And this is what the food shortages signaled. This is what the 2014 crash exposed. A system that cannot bear bad news cannot respond to it until the damage is already done. And no amount of marble can fix that. After Niyazov died in 2006, power passed to Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedov, a man who served as the president's personal dentist before rising through the political ranks. He reversed some of the more theatrical policies. He reopened hospitals, removed some of the stranger statues, phased out the runama from public spaces. On the surface, it looked like reform, but the architecture of control stayed completely intact. The secret police stayed. The surveillance stayed. The enforced disappearances continued, though, and he built his own cult of personality. His image replacing Niyazov's in public institutions. His portraits appearing alongside his sons in every government building, paid for by mandatory collections from state employees. He banned satellite dishes and air conditioners in the capital because he personally found them ugly. He commissioned new golden statues of himself, of his horses, of his dogs. The names changed, but the system did not. And then, in 2022, he did something no Central Asian leader had done since the era of the Khans. He handed power to his son. Sardar Berdimuhamedov became president. His father became chairman of the upper house of parliament and was quickly elevated to national leader of the Turkmen people, a constitutional title that supersedes the presidency. Today, father and son nominally share authority, but in practice, the father never left. So here we are, in 2026. Turkmenistan is nominally a republic with a president, a parliament, and a constitution that guarantees freedoms of expression, religion, and movement. In practice, it's a hereditary dictatorship run by a single family, with no meaningful political competition, zero press freedom, a civil liberty score of 0 out of 100, and an economy structurally dependent on a single commodity sold to a single buyer through pipelines it cannot fully control. The Constitution is theater. The Parliament is theater. The elections, in which the ruling family's candidates receive north of 70% of votes in contests with no real opposition, are theater. And the marble keeps going up. New monuments, new palaces, new golden statues. The construction never stops, because the construction is the message. As long as the buildings are rising, the narrative holds. As long as the image holds, the system holds. As long as the gas flows east through pipelines to China, the money to maintain that image keeps coming. But systems built entirely on image have a particular kind of fragility. They can look stable for a very long time, and then, very suddenly, they don't. But the more perfect the system looks, the more it struggles to handle anything it didn't plan for. Because perfection requires control, and total control requires closing off every channel that might introduce uncertainty, including the channels that might have warned you that a crisis was coming. There's no free press to report on shortages before they become catastrophic. There's no independent judiciary to push back on officials who misallocate funds. There's no civil society to organize around emerging problems. There are no opposition politicians who propose alternatives. Every feedback mechanism has been deliberately removed. So when something goes wrong, and something always eventually does go wrong, the leadership finds out at the same time as everyone else. Except by then, it's already a crisis. That is what Turkmenistan has built. Not a utopia, not even a functioning state in any real sense, but a controlled environment. A country that's turned itself into a showroom, immaculate maybe on the surface, held together by fear and hydrocarbons, and utterly without the resilience that it would need if either of those two things failed. So here's what we want to know. Do you think that a system like this can hold, or are the cracks already spreading, and the world just isn't watching closely enough? Drop your take in the comments, and if you want more breakdowns of the regimes and power systems shaping our world right now, subscribe to Fall of Nations. We'll be here.